This episode of Connect Call discusses school shootings and may be distressing. Listener discretion is advised. If you're struggling, support is available. Please consider reaching out to a trusted person or a local crisis resource. Thank you. Hi, this is Hannah Brett with Connect Call, and tonight's episode is actually very near and dear to my heart in many ways. I think I've expressed this before, but one of the many reasons why I wanted to do this podcast and why I continue to do the work I do is also forget about my professional career for 18 years in this treatment world. Me, myself, and I, got sober a long time ago. And also part of that, I've also struggled over the years with my own mental health. As we know, all that addiction really is trauma and mental health untreated. And I noticed around 2016, 2017, my depression was taking a major dump. And the reason why, again, going back to why I wanted to do this podcast is, not only to say me too, but also I know how difficult it is to find resources. I know how difficult it is to advocate for yourself, even someone like me in the industry. And I not only want to be an inspiration for people to ask for help, but also, talk about a lot of the services that I maybe tried or that are out there that we can recommend to people out there from people who've actually walked the walk, So my depression came back around 2016 and it was really bad, 2017. And I was working through it, thinking it was just going to, maybe it was something to do with my, time of the month or something. I mean, I didn't know where it was coming from, but it was debilitating. The only way I could describe it to people was kind of like what I'd witnessed on TV with postpartum depression. I wasn't homicidal, but I definitely was suicidal. And I had suicidal ideation. It was a really dark place. I was at a point where I wasn't really, by 2018, when the episodes would come, I would sleep all day. I wouldn't really bathe. It was really difficult to eat. And I thought I was going to be feeling like this for the rest of my life. And I was slowly asking for help a little bit, but really just felt very hopeless. And it was a really dark time. The day was February 14th in 2018. And what I remember of that day was I was laying on the couch, again, really, really depressed. And I was hearing in the background, unfortunately, another shooting was occurring, another tragedy was happening in our country, another school was being affected. But I really wasn't listening to a lot of the details. What I did hear in the background was more a family member of mine who was about 14, 15 at the time, was camp best friends with these two little girls who were in one of those classrooms in Parkland. Mind you, I talk about this and I'm also trying to be super careful and also loving about talking about this because I don't want to trigger anybody out there. I don't want to bring people back to any bad memories. But it was the shooting that happened at Parkland. And what I do remember is he was friends with these two little girls. And by the end of the day, I unfortunately found out, like the rest of you, one of these little girls was one of the 17 victims who passed away. And what I found out from talking to that family member is, they were in class together, sitting next to each other. And I remember finding out what her name was. And in my head, I remember I just was ruminating about this little girl that I'd never met who survived, but unfortunately had to go through one of the probably most traumatic tragedies to experience something like that. And I remember thinking, if this 14-year-old can get up tomorrow and just have breakfast and breathe and start her day, I definitely can get off the couch. And it did something for me where I just kept envisioning what she must have been going through. And I felt like if she can ask for help, I can ask for help. And what ended up happening through that journey afterwards was two things. One, I asked for help for my depression, and I was really active in getting better. And the other thing is God gave me a voice to use, and I definitely am my mother's daughter, and I'm very much an advocate for kids. I don't have children, but I'm basically, for those children out there that don't have a voice, I like to say that I am their voice. And so what I tried to do was do a lot of homework and looking into what resources were being offered for mental health for the community. And I was hitting a lot of walls. It was really frustrating. I wasn't really getting very far, but I really wanted to help. I really wanted to help. I even was trying to plan, support groups in the community with some resources I could bring of amazing therapists. And, and one of the things I was able to offer as well was there's a foundation out there, Onsite Foundation, who had started a 1 week intensive for those who, from tragedy to triumph, adults who had been victims or survivors of this type of tragedy. And I had offered to the foundation that let me be the advocate call for adolescents. So if you get any kids calling, adolescents calling, or just anybody looking for treatment and needed someone to kind of fight the good fight for them, please have them call me. And I was doing that. I was trying to, with cases that were coming to me, I would call all these treatment centers and be like, can we do a scholarship? Can you give any funding? These kids deserve it. I don't think they're getting funding. And we're going to talk more about that. And just randomly, like a year later, I got this phone call from this amazing mom who had gotten my number, I think, from the foundation. And she really was just looking for a second opinion and for some advice. I think just to talk through a little bit about her experience, but also about, her daughter at the time was able to get some funding and get a scholarship to go to a really good adolescent treatment program in the country. And she'd already been there, I think, for like 6 months. And I just kept telling her to, follow the clinical recommendations, and this is going to be a long process. And the most amazing thing happened at the end of that call because I asked her who her daughter was. And when she said her name, it was that little girl from Parkland that I thought about from day one. And we are very fortunate that today we have her mother here. My guest today is Nicole Cook. And Nicole, we're so happy to have you. Well, I'm happy to have you here on my Connect call. A big reason why I wanted to bring Nicole on the show, and a topic I really wanted to address, because as a country, we are all being traumatized by these daily shootings. We also, I realized over the years in treatment that even little trauma stays with us, and I really just wanted to talk to Nicole and just kind of bring awareness and some light to what really goes down after a tragedy like this unfolds. I think a lot of us just assume the government comes in and takes care of everything. And so, Nicole, I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I know this is a subject I know you don't want to go back and think about, but in all of our talks, you have just been so informative about kind of walking me through the process and how disappointed I was on how I personally feel the government kind of failed and failed these kids. You can help other parents out there to ask for the help they need and how to go about getting it. So I guess one of my first questions I'm going to ask Nicole is, right after the tragedy, you know, were you notified? Did anyone say these are the mental health resources offered for, the kids at school? I would think that funding would be delegated to those kids. Yeah, what mental health resources were kind of offered to you after the tragedy, if you can walk through a little bit of that?
Well, I'm also going to share that at the time I was a assistant professor in public health. So this is what I do. I work in communities, local communities with people, helping them to improve access to care, not just behavioral health, but access to care in general. So, I consider myself fairly savvy in that. So immediately afterwards, the Red Cross came in and set up kind of emergency, station points. And we went a couple of days later to that emergency station point, and the woman who I guess does the screening and the intake asked my daughter for kind of her story. And we got about 5 minutes into it, and the woman started hysterically crying. And she said, "You need a lot of help. This is beyond me." So we left. And you're just kind of walking around in a daze, right? Like you just don't
Right.
know how to navigate. There was so much loss. I had two daughters in the school that day, and between them, they knew every single person who was killed, every single person who was injured. So many people who were psychologically injured, but not physically injured. So, and that's kind of where the problem is that in this country, we don't really recognize psychological injury from exposure to gun violence. So services are not really available in that way. In terms of state
Which
government,
can I just
yeah,
interrupt and say one thing about that, which I will always say, and it drives me crazy. I mean, I can talk forever about gun reform and how our country and the adults and the administration continue to let us down. And the biggest victims I see on a daily are the children, whether they're doing these shooter drills at school or whether, unfortunately, it impacts them. Like, what's crazy to me is everyone says who doesn't agree with gun reform, it's a mental health issue. Yet they're doing absolutely nothing, I feel, to help mental health and only continuing. I mean, the drills I hear are very traumatic and they're all, it's really doing damage to our kids and to everybody. And we're not being taken care of and they're not being taken care of with resources, I think.
yeah. I mean, well, there's a lot of trauma in this world.
Yeah.
So, so from a victim perspective, from a state perspective, there's about $5,200 that's offered for people who were exposed psychologically to, who are considered kind of a psychological victim without physical injury. So that's the extent of that.
5,000
And then
total?
5,000 total. That's kind of what it is. And then there was maybe another 1,000 that came in from all of the money that was collected and donated. They kind of, divided it among whoever put a claim in. If you were in the building, if you were injured, if you were on school that day. I don't know how they did it. But I mean, the bigger problem. Okay, the bigger problem is mental health care in our country, right? I mean, like the bigger
Right.
problem is that just navigating that is impossible.
Right.
Down here in Florida specifically, there's very, very, very few resources that are covered by insurance, so it's mostly private pay. So,
Right.
I mean, there's just a whole bunch of issues. In our case, both children separately got connected by kind of good Samaritans, friends, whatever, there might be. And I think we paid 275 an hour for weekly care.
So
Was there
go on.
support? Yeah, I mean, so about maybe 6 months later, there was a federal grant that came through, but there was no direct money given to families. All of the grants were given directly to organizations, and how those organizations were selected. Well, I mean, I work
I
in
was
this world
witness
with
to
grants.
some of it and it wasn't very,
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of services that just came to us. And then there were a lot of services that were, I'm sorry, were just kind of organized. Um, there wasn't any direct dollars that came into families. So I guess there was a way that if you wanted to, like this was the big joke, the big one that got a lot of money was Henderson. Henderson's the one that treated the perpetrator. So it's like, who's going to take their kid there? Like, I
I
mean,
heard that.
and then it
That's,
got really messy because in order to take your child there and get free services from Henderson through this grant, you had to go into the general waiting room. You had to tell your entire story to a therapist who then assessed you for services. So, and these places are scary for 14 years old. My daughter was 14 at the time. I'm not going to take her into, a behavioral health
it is a
location.
behavioral health hospital. Yeah.
It's a behavioral health hospital.
We'll talk
Have
about
her
that
sit
in another
there, have her
episode.
go through the waiting room, have her
Right.
meet the therapist that she doesn't know, have her tell the whole story all over again of what she went through. And it was so incredibly traumatic. Like, you described it a little bit, but it was a battlefield is what it was.
Right.
It was a complete and utter battlefield. And these kids were in there for 20 minutes with everything you can imagine around them. So you don't want them to have to tell their story. So I was very involved because I'm a public health professor in trying to help kind of allocate these resources. And one of the things that I really felt strongly about was to offer virtual care, and this was pre-COVID, but there was never any virtual care offered. So my other daughter was a graduating senior. And if you think of it, like so many of the victims were seniors, right? So many of the kids who died were victims, were seniors. And there was no virtual care. So these kids like literally graduated and went off, and there was nothing ever for them at all. Like there was no connection, there was no,
Right.
and we see it now because now I can see what 6 years later, 7 years later, now I can see the trauma kind of coming up as we know how
Yeah.
it goes.
Yeah. And we're going to
So
talk about that.
yeah. So um so I mean I know we talked about this before. I think the intention was there, and I think there was a lot of chaos. And then there was a lot of people that just came in and offered services, but there was no coordinating center. There was no
Right.
organizing center. There was no validation of, evidence-based practice. Everybody wanted to help. I mean, and so anybody who wanted to help in some way could set up a corner shop and people could,
And there
and
were a lot of helpers out there, by the way. I
there were a
witnessed
lot of
it who were
helpers.
no,
Yeah.
who were exploiting a lot of the
Yeah.
families, you know?
Ton. I mean, we were told by, you know, again, you don't know, but here's just a very quick story. My daughter was very suicidal, and the the center that was eventually set up since about 8, 9 months later in Parkland, we had gone there numerous times. They were really against sending kids to treatment programs, like remote treatment programs. So they suggested that I try this program that was like a horse therapy program, 8 hours a day, $800 a day. It's $800 down in Davie, great therapist. It's like a crazy story, but we had no options, right? I mean, you're walking around, you have no idea what to do. I'm being told, don't send my child away. Meanwhile, she's telling me she wants to wrap her car around a tree. So we do it, $800 a day. About our third day there, I get a call from the therapist. There's a woman out in California she worked with, and I know I should know this, but some other person who had been held underground and then emerged, they found her like being held and kidnapped. And this woman's convinced she can cure my daughter in 3 days. So she flies across the country, comes to the horse farm. We go down there and we have our family therapy with the therapist, this person from California, my daughter who's completely high, myself, my husband, and this woman from California proceeds to tell us that she can take my daughter for here's her book of the person she saved, and she
By
can
the
take my
way, if
daughter.
anyone whips out a book as a mental health provider in the first meeting, you need to run and not walk. Thank you.
She ripped out this book, tells me she can cure my daughter in 3 days, and I should let her take her. Now, keep in mind, I have a doctorate degree. I work in behavioral health. I'm like, tell me more, because all you want is for your child to feel better. Thank God. Am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Yeah, you are. Let's go.
Thank God for my husband was like, what the fuck? He's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And he like stormed out of there. But here's an example, right? Like, you just don't know what you're supposed to do.
I think also I just want to speak on that because I was, when I first met with a couple of the families from Parkland, I remember meeting one of the moms right after, and rightfully so. She looked at me and said, "Who are you and what are you trying to get out of this?" Because I think they had already, and I'd witnessed it. I witnessed counselors who were not, I'll say it, they were not qualified to do this traumatic work and do this trauma work. And they were literally, because they were licensed in Florida and lived in the neighborhood, I was hearing like they were like climbing into kids' beds because they didn't want to go to therapy. And so they were like building this rapport. And it was just, I'm sitting out on the outside, like with the rest of my colleagues who weren't allowed to do anything if we weren't licensed in Florida. And it was just, it was a mess. And there were people really who were making a lot of money off the tragedy. And, the more recognition, I spoke to somebody, unfortunately, who had survived a shooting a long time ago. And when I had called him to get some guidance on how I should navigate and trying to advocate for kids, he literally said on the phone at the first thing, he said, "How did you get my number? And by the way, you can see me on Sky News, BBC, CNN, MSNBC with the 5 today." And I said, who are the five? And these were the five children, students, who I think it started March for Our Lives and were on the cover of Time magazine, or they were on a cover of a magazine. Literally said that to me. And so I knew right away there was a lot of people kind of, which is unfortunate, but also just to go back, and I just want to touch on this before I ask the next question, which we're going to lead into the next question is, also as someone, and again, this is where I'm like, I don't get it. This is happening at such a frequent pace. I mean, it's happening so much to these kids. I'm shocked. There is no protocol. There is no emergency team that comes in like FEMA, or you know what I mean? Or,
There was. There
I
was
mean,
an emergency
FEMA,
team
but
that came
completely catered to the behavioral health aspect of things, meaning that my belief, and some of my colleagues, we've even spoken about it, that it's insane that we haven't gotten more parents like yourself to maybe be able to sit down and say therapists who have worked with these children, what are the things we need immediately, and kind of building that like emergency crew to come in and really organize and really get you guys the right help, because that's what we're also seeing is a lot of people in case of, in a haze, you don't know who the right people are, and people may take advantage and do more harm than good. And so I guess my question is, and also I want to say this also with the putting all the funding into the Henderson Behavioral Health, I had heard of that. And two things. One, my opinion, I truly believe the less we do of white walls and exit signs for kids in treatment is better. And also, we also know this just from getting the calls I do all day. Every kid, every adult, everybody who needs help with their mental health, regardless, even if they're all, in that same situation, their symptoms for PTSD are going to pop up at different times in their life. They're also going to show up differently, and the needs are going to be different. So this kind of thought that we can just give every kid can do the same type of programming and it's going to work, it just seems a little ignorant. And I hate to say it.
I just want
I'm
to
not trying to
caveat.
dog anybody, but
No. I just want to caveat this on two sides. One is we didn't know what would work. People didn't know. There
of
was
course.
no precedent for this. The only precedent for something like this was in Norway when they had, that shooting in like the 1990s at the cemetery.
Right.
There was no precedent for a mass casualty event with high schoolers. I know we had Columbine, I know we had Sandy Hook, but there was no precedent for what happened in Parkland. So the idea of knowing, which is really sad because we should be able to mobilize, right? But if you
Right.
don't expect something's going to happen, you're not going to set up. By the way, I also, have spent years teaching emergency preparedness, so I have a very deep understanding of these kinds of things.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
you can't create every single risk scenario, so there was
Of course.
no like. So I'm just saying, like, I'm not pretending because it's completely wrong because we obviously know we should bring in qualified people with trauma, right? But these people didn't really exist. So you didn't have a ton of people in Florida who
Right.
understood how to work with kids who had been in a mass casualty event.
Of course.
Right? Like we don't even really have that in America. So that's the first thing I just want to, bring that up, that I have to believe that most people's intentions were good. I agree with you
Right.
that there was exploitation. I told you my own story, but I think for the most part, people's intentions were good, but they were
Of course.
naive. They didn't know what to do. They didn't have there's no evidence around this. There was no structure. You're absolutely right. Like there was no one coordinating. The school was coordinating something, the Red Cross, the city, the county, children's, um, what the organization is, but there was no main coordinator of all of this work.
Right.
But I just want to put that out there. I think it's naivety. Do we have precedent for this? Of course we do. We have precedent of mass casualty events. So we could have done something like that, right? Like you're right. They could have brought in FEMA. They could have had one coordinator to organize it, but there was too much chaos, too much blaming, too much
Of course.
misknowledge, you know, misappropriation of.
But can I ask you something, Nicole? I think at this point, and again, I know we didn't have a lot of experience in Florida in the high school. Two things that were kind of a conundrum for me. One was why so many qualified, I mean, really trauma trained, qualified therapists that I knew of were trying to volunteer their time at the school and were blocked because they weren't licensed in Florida.
Which is ridiculous because Florida does license people with simply being able to kind of like, I mean, they could have accelerated that. Florida's
Okay.
always have licensure for people from out of
Right.
state, and it's like not a
Okay.
complicated licensure to get. I mean, they
Right.
don't have
Okay.
licensure, but it's not a complicated licensure to get. They were not allowed in the schools because they were not on an approved list. Whoever created that stupid approved list, I have no idea because there were
Right.
all these therapists that tried to get on the approved list and they
Right.
couldn't get on it. And when
Right.
they were on the approved list, there was also a whole nother barrier in terms of who was getting free care or who wasn't getting free care.
Right.
You're
The
right
other
about that. It's really hard to access.
Right. And I think also the other piece, and I don't think it takes so many tragedies to happen. And I know everything's different, but like even when Sandy Hook had happened, even Columbine, even just looking back, I just never understood why at least what they could have done is set up individual funding or people would apply
Well, Sandy
based on.
Hook, I think, did. Sandy Hook did, but we live in a Republican state, so that was unlikely to happen.
But when I did call, and I'm not going to name names, but I did call one of the foundations for Sandy Hook because I did get a child years later who was a first grader who needed treatment. And when I went to a couple foundations, I was told, both of them told me, and I could be wrong, but this is what I remember, that the max this child was going to be getting is $1,500.
A
So
year.
people,
Yeah, something like that. It's crazy.
total, yeah, 1,500 for treatment. And
I mean,
just
I've
so
spoken
people,
with people who said that they get massages and like they still till today they get like an amount of funding for wellness. But I'm not an expert on it, and it was just one
but
person.
this was residential treatment.
Yeah, it
And
happens.
my thing is, and even when you said the number 5,000, for people out there that don't understand the cost for treatment per day, we're looking at a minimum of 1,000 a day. Most of
Yeah,
treatment is 1,500 to 2,000 a day. So again,
it's
I know
much
that.
more. I mean, maybe that was where you were.
Well,
It's
I
it
just
was
know how much.
40,000. Yeah, it was 40,000 a month before the psychiatrist weekly visit of 400,
Well, you
all
were
the
also at
extras.
a very very good treatment center, but it was more expensive than most, I think.
Okay.
I just want we're getting so carried away and I love it.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
something I also wanted to discuss and I just to help people, and I think this was something we really did touch on, which people need to hear. A lot of times you will find the symptoms of PTSD after a traumatic event like this is not going to be instant. It's going to
Right.
be years later, or it could be months later, and everybody is different. But when things started to happen, or when you needed a therapist, what kind of therapist were you looking for and how did you find them?
So the first one, I mean, it was days after, was again kind of Good Samaritans sent us to a trauma therapist who was Israeli, and so she had a lot of experience.
Great.
Very expensive, but you don't care at that point, right? You just want your child to get some
Right.
help. And then and then we had tried to go through Eagles Haven, but again, they didn't really connect you with therapists. I mean, unless it was like Henderson,
Right.
right? Like it wasn't they didn't have therapy. They didn't offer therapy.
So just to stress this, when we're talking about trauma and tragedy, you definitely want to do your homework and you definitely want someone who is, you know,
Yeah,
tr- has
you
dealt with
do.
these
I mean,
experiences
yeah,
and it also works really well with trauma.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all a function of, they're all private. In Florida, it's like almost all private.
Same in all states, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That's just, I tell families that all day, every day. I hate to tell you. Even the okay therapists and psychiatrists out there, everyone is going now private and you're filing your own claims
Yeah.
because the insurance companies are just not
Yeah.
great with reimbursement.
I
So,
mean, now I know a little bit more. I think now I would ask to see resumes. I might look for somebody who's worked at the VA. I mean, if it's like, again, thinking a mass casualty event, the people
right,
don't have experience working with children, but they do have experience working with mass casualty. So, they're not going to cry when they hear the story, which is a very common thing, right? Like a very common thing. And, even at the treatment center, by the way, we were like in family therapy one time and like one of the counselors broke down crying. So after hearing my daughter's story. So,
right,
I mean, I think I think, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's
What I'm
children.
hearing is, and it's not to discourage people. It's really to show them how difficult it was for you kind of to access these. And this is with, again, your knowledge and you
It was
being
my knowledge, my connections, me being in the middle of like that world.
right.
Eventually I remember, I think I told you this before, there was just another good Samaritan who I don't even know how I was connected to. I think I was connected to him via one of the committees that I was on to, help participate in services in our community. And
Right.
he ran a boys treatment center like in the middle of Florida. But somehow I just connected with him and I talked to him
Think
and I remember I remember sitting in my shower because it was the quietest place in my house, on the floor, cuddled in the shower, tears dripping down my like trying to say, "What do I do? Like, tell me what to do because I'm so confused." The Eagles Haven program that was set up to help, I told you that was set up to help. They were very anti-treatment. So
why
they
were they
told me to
anti-treatment?
don't know, and they were great therapists, but again, they weren't trauma therapists, right? Like they weren't these kind of trauma therapists. They we didn't really have any children's treatment centers in Florida, so maybe that's all they knew. Like maybe all they knew was children's treatment centers in Florida. Most of them came from Jafco. So maybe that's all they knew in their experience. This wasn't a good avenue to explore. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean, that's all. We almost have zero or at the time. Right now, we have one that was just built at Coral Springs, another one's being built down in Miami. But at the time, I can't imagine any children's treatment centers that weren't just for substance abuse in Florida.
I
Remember
know,
that.
but this is again, and I know you're trying to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and I like that. But as someone who sees a lot of again, it's kind of a red flag when, and I understand there might have not been the resources in the state of Florida, but any counselors and therapists do know there are
On the
good.
west side. Yeah. Well, they didn't.
And I think a part of that also, and this happens, and again, no disrespect to anybody who is doing the treatment, but a lot of times if you're not referring out to other sources and things that maybe kids or other people they need, it's telling me that they wanted to keep it in house, and there was a reason for that, and so
Well, they
and
didn't
that's
do it
okay.
in house. They didn't
At
do it in
Eagles
house.
Haven.
This is Eagles Haven. There was no in house. They
Oh,
didn't
so
do
they were just
therapy.
referring.
I think, Hannah, I'm gonna go out on a limb here in retrospect. Their experience was Jafco. That's an extremely local program that works with local
Right,
Medicaid CHIP patients.
right.
Their world is Henderson. Their world is not these other new treatment modalities. We're here in Florida. We've never heard of EMDR or brain spotting or, some of these like, newer evidence-based therapies, right? This is unfortunately the foster care world and the treatments that are available to them. And looking at that, it's Henderson. That's
I got
probably
it.
all they knew. You're right. Why didn't when we set up Eagles Haven, why didn't we think broader to really connect people with top quality services? That was never a thought. I don't think there was ever a thought to connect people with new top quality resources that are available. You could go to a horse therapy group. You can do mindfulness and you can be Baker acted or sent to whatever local
I
hospital
know.
there might be. That was pretty much where it was. And as you know, it wasn't until I spoke with this person who was like an angel to me, and he gave me the name of three places. He goes, there's only three places in the country somebody with your daughter's trauma that I would even consider sending them to. And he named it. And then the problem is, what do you do? Insurance doesn't cover out of
How do
state.
you find the funding?
How do you find the funding? How do you deal with sending your child across the country? Do you send a child into some of these wilderness, right? There was also this whole wilderness thing. But like,
Right.
how could you send a child? I mean, this wasn't a kid who was like, what is the word? Um, the disorder, right? Like where they're just, my daughter wasn't mean or nasty or cruel. She was suffering
And she
from a mental
probably
health
was
issue again.
terrified to leave her house, I would
Yeah.
think.
So I'm not going to throw her in a wilderness program and make
Right,
every time I don't want to punish her. Again,
right.
for some kids, that might be the appropriate. avenue. But making
Right.
her work 8 hours a day is not, she was going to treatment. All this time she was going to treatment. She wasn't doing anything wrong.
No.
So
And I think also talking to some of these, I've talked to a couple of these kids, and I guess the conundrum too is you don't want to be in a room sometimes with other survivors from something that like a shooting, because it only brings you back, and it it just I've heard that they don't want that, but then they also don't want to just be in a group with people who've
everything's minimalized. Really?
right,
Sorry, like, I don't, and obviously we know trauma is not, it's not the
right,
extent of the trauma that, creates that influences behavioral health, right? It's different for every person. It could be, multifactorial. It builds on each other. Like we know that. But you're right. Every single time in family therapy, every single time, a year in family therapy, every freaking week, when she told her story, everybody else's mouths. Why are you here? We got to a point where we never told people anymore why we were here.
right.
We just didn't want to. We didn't want the looks of sympathy, not from the parents, not from the kids, not from the
I
counselors,
understand.
not from anybody. They are overwhelmed. The truth of the matter is, every therapist, including at this amazing place we went to, they're overwhelmed by the trauma. Overwhelmed. It's overwhelming. And so all you can do is say, okay, everyone has trauma. Let's now deal with the trauma. I don't, there's no evidence. There's no
Can
evidence on this.
I
There is
know.
with the VA. Look at the VA's billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars on how we're supposed to navigate and treat and care for our wonderful service members who come back and suffer. There's an entire system in place. But for our kids in this country, it's nothing.
And I would just think at this point, if the government was going to help, just maybe it's like first, after like enough time and enough of what we're seeing, just like we saw with COVID, I'm shocked. No one is, and maybe they are doing
They're
some
not, because I
outcome
do.
studies.
Yeah, I just finished a can I speak about I just did a 3-year study on firearm violence. We received funding from Aim Ahead. It's a NIH artificial intelligence mechanism. And me and my team had about 3 million. And through that work, what we sought to establish is how firearm violence exposure is being collected in electronic health records in physician offices. So right now, our problem in America is if somebody is physically injured or dies from gun violence, they're going to the emergency department, they're going to the inpatient, or they're going to the morgue. And there are standardized diagnosis codes, just like we would have for asthma or diabetes, for all of that. That's all, open wounds as a result of firearm, trauma to the head as a result of the bullet. There's a whole number of codes around that. But what we don't have any codes on are for exposure to firearm violence without injury. So an example, kind of co-occurring example to that might be intimate partner violence or elder abuse. We have guidelines on how we screen for that in ambulatory care settings. We have diagnosis codes for some of them on how we indicate in a problem list of a person that they've had that exposure. And what that does is it allows us to follow it through over time. So if somebody doesn't constantly talk about their, trauma, it presumably could be notified from care provider to care provider. So what we
Right,
did in our research is we assessed millions and millions and millions of electronic health record primary care data, all secured behind a firewall and with approval from our institutional review board. And we reviewed to see how is firearm violence exposure being documented in primary care and in behavioral health care. And what we largely found is that it's not, which is what we expected, right? People aren't screening for it, people aren't talking about it, therefore it's not being documented. So we simply don't know. The estimates in this country is that 2/3 of American adults are somehow exposed to firearm violence, either through seeing community violence, like people who died, or having a friend or a family member who's committed suicide who was in a shooting.
right,
2/3 of American adults. But that is just an estimate from surveys. Actually documenting it is not something that we do. So if we don't document it, we can't research what the trajectory of the illnesses, of the potential illnesses. we assume, based on our knowledge of what the VA has gone through, what the work the Veterans Association has done, and it's kind of intuitive, that people who are exposed to mass trauma are more likely to have substance abuse, are more likely to have PTSD,
Right.
are more likely to have chronic disease, lower quality of life, right? We
Right.
know that, but we haven't actually studied it. And so, as far as children goes, we actually have no idea what the most appropriate treatments are. Where should we be navigating these children? They're coming into, you're being seen by your pediatrician. I'm going to bet that most pediatricians who saw these kids have no idea what the kids are holding inside or what their exposure has been. And we know this, right? Like we know this sadly from rape victims who kind of identify 20 years later
Right.
what happened.
Right.
So thank you for allowing me to talk about our research. We have a number of published articles in the academic literature, and that work obviously has stopped under the current administration. But hopefully, where we move towards is in the future actually screening for trauma
Yeah.
beyond, a more global trauma. Many screen right now, again, for intimate partner violence, many screen right now for child abuse, but we don't screen for exposure to firearm violence.
Right.
And that's really unfortunate because it's so incredibly prevalent. And even like you're saying,
I'm shocked.
the school, the fire drills cause
The shooter drill.
of
Yeah.
trauma. By the
Yeah.
way, a
It's the
lot of
fire
those
drill.
shooter drills, maybe you need them, maybe you don't. I'm not commenting. A lot of people in school safety, a lot of people that came out of Parkland are very supportive of it, right? If you can't prevent
I
gun
know.
violence, prepare people to react to it. But again, that creates an enormous amount of trauma, and we're not dealing with it.
Right. I mean, I have
All
to
right.
just say, and thank you for speaking on everything about the work you're doing. I mean, thank God we have people like you out there. And I hate that you had to personally walk through it with your child and your family and your community. But I'm just shocked that I remember like talking to a couple of my girlfriends where their kids were little and they were doing one of the drills. And I remember asking them, I go, so what is it? How does it go? Everybody gets into a bathroom stall and you're traumatizing an 8-year-old. And then you just say, okay, go to recess. We'll see you at music class. See you in math. And that's what's happening. And that to me is also, I mean, that's a whole nother episode about,
It is.
again, nothing against the schools, but the fact that we still think social studies is more important than maybe regulating and working with our children's, how to emotionally regulate and the trauma they experience on the daily. I mean, I have kids who have never even been through a drill, who have not been through a tragedy, thank God, but they're still scared and traumatized to go to school,
They're
you
all
know?
scared and traumatized. Like it is, if you look at the few research surveys that have been done, it's ridiculous how much people are scared and traumatized. And it's not
I'm
just
scared to go
Parkland. I
into
mean,
the
it's
grocery
all
store
of
with
it.
headphones on.
Right.
I'm scared to go into a
Exactly.
crowd.
And now, the hell knows what they were thinking, but Florida just, Publix here, our supermarket just passed open carry because our governor passed open carry. So now you can walk into Publix with a gun. Now they're working really hard in the state of Florida to reverse what they did after the Parkland shooting. They want to lower the age of assault rifles and firearms again from 21 to 18. And there's a bill that's going to be voted on in the House next week. Like it is so unbelievable, right? Like we also can't walk around all day long being angry.
No, I know.
We're
And
working
my
hard on that.
and
Yeah, we're working
honestly,
hard on that.
and I saw it with Parkland. The one thing that inspired me after the fact of such a horrible tragedy is I was grateful to see these kids finally
Yeah.
stand up and
But
say,
it took a toll on them.
yeah, but we're seeing this more and more, which is like the only hope I have is that we have children who have now grown up in this era of this, trauma. And so my hope is that they'll get and start voting more and also becoming politicians themselves and doing the work that a lot of these adults out there are cowards to do and are choosing to ignore. And that's a whole nother,
It's a
and
whole
I could,
nother. America is unique
right. It's very
in our
unique.
gun violence problem. That is right.
And again, everywhere is different, but it's upsetting. And the more we talk about it, the more I'm sure it's activating you as it's activating me. And, I guess a couple more questions I would have is, and I think this is something we we forget. And, again, like when we think of the victims, we think of those who have died or have been hurt and physically. And we forget about,
We do
the others, including the parents like yourself, the families. Your life changes
completely.
completely. So my question is to families out there that have been affected by something like a tragedy like this, and it hits the whole family really. Like, what support, what resources were you guys able to get as a family or as individuals to walk through this?
Well, I went for the free counseling
Right,
through, that was offered. I went 5, 6 times. Therapist was nice enough. I mean, like most parents, you just go into action mode,
right,
right? Like you're less care thinking about yourself and more thinking about your child. And
right.
because, every single scenario is different, right? Like every single person looks at it differently and reacts differently. So I could talk about my own personal story, but it probably is just mine, nobody
But
else's.
can parents access and families access support groups, or is there anything like
There are
that?
no support groups. I wish there were. Eagles Haven set up some support groups, but again, nothing was virtual. Everything was in person. So if you're a parent
So
of young
difficult.
children, actually going to a support group is not, especially with a trauma kid at home that you don't want to leave. It's not so, that's not so um,
Right,
feasible. There are no support groups that I know of since. The same thing as we were talking about with the kids a couple of years ago. I joined a support group that was offered for Parkland families, and it was on grief. And it was the same thing. Everyone who was there had lost a mother or a father. Like they were there because they had lost a
right,
family member.
right.
I did not lose my daughter, thank God. Like I had no connection. There was no relevance. There was no, you know, it wasn't there. Why we don't have support groups for, you know, families, I don't know. That would have been something that really would have been helpful because we're very much on our own. Time really does heal things, thank God. So, now it's 7 years later.
Mm,
Um, and it still changed our life, but we're able to navigate it a little bit more. No, no, no. I did join like another, I mean, obviously when our daughter was in treatment, we had mandatory support groups to attend, which we did our best to. And, we joined
right,
some weekly support groups, just kind of what it's like having a child in treatment. And I encourage any parent to do that. Take advantage of everything they offer you
right,
because it's really important to learn from people who have like walked the path, like walking it with you and walked it before you.
right.
But like specifically around this, no, like around shooting.
I will say that was the one thing I was trying to do that didn't work out for me or for you. Just that was the first thing I thought of when I spoke to one of the parents. I remember she had said, when she had lost her child, that with her other kids, she had this, I remember I was talking about going to treatment or getting the support for the family. And she looked at me and she said, Hannah, I don't let my sons go down to the mailbox alone.
Yeah, I know.
And so it hit me right then and there that, we needed support groups locally for the kids as well as support groups for the parents. And that's what I was trying to do, which didn't work out. But I guess I want to ask you if there is one thing that you wish that we could actually implement going forward. What would it be that wasn't given right out
Yeah,
the gate? Because we did talk about this once about,
I thought
um,
a lot about this. First of all, you need one centralized location for somebody managing all this, right? And you need to pull the idea of panel management, right? Like it's a very common idea in medicine. Panel management. Think of all these kids were affected. They're all part of this cohort group, right? Like
right.
they share something in common. So now has someone in charge deciding, can we at least reach out to them and see what they need?
Yeah, and
Instead,
you told me there was no registration, like,
there was
nobody checked
no
on your
register.
family.
And you would think it would come from the school, right? But the
Right.
school wasn't allowed to do it. And then because of FERPA, they weren't allowed to share the list with anybody to do it. So the school did nothing.
So no
The
one
school
called.
offered some in-house services, but they didn't reach out. My daughter, who was a senior, so this happens in February, she graduated in June. She never got a call, ever. Not a call, not a notice, not a text, not an email asking how she's doing. Never.
which is
And
just
parents like had to navigate this, right? So they all went to these universities. Like we all had to call the universities and we all had to talk about, you know, like things like fire drills and things. I mean, these were real things.
right.
My daughter was been on lockdown at UF like 4 times in her freshman year because of
Wait,
that.
say that again? Say that again?
She was like on lockdown 4 times in her freshman year.
You
I mean, it was
serious?
so messed up. But, again, you're just on your own, right? You would have thought like maybe there would have been something, right? Like some coordinating, some proactive. And this is what I think I said to you. There was nothing proactive. Everything was reactive. If you found out about something, you could access it. But there was nothing like coming at, there was no general information sheet saying, this is what you do, this is how you advocate, these are the resources available to you. There was
Right,
none of that. And there really wasn't because I had students involved in one initiative of putting up posters everywhere to access suicide screening. I ended up getting a grant from the Blues Foundation, which was wonderful. And we had a 3-year grant to increase mental health literacy, specifically among people who speak Haitian Creole, because we have a huge Haitian population, Spanish. And
oh,
I
you're so
designed
awesome.
virtual work groups so
Right,
that we had parent representatives who decided the agenda with amongst themselves. And then we met once a month and we brought in experts. We brought in people from the Broward County school system to help educate on resources that are available. But
right.
there was nobody coordinating any of this in Parkland ever.
Can I I wanna end with this, and I wanna also let the viewers know and listeners know that after each episode, what we try to do is, is give out the resources we are talking about, some of the show notes of, some really important points that,
Yeah.
so hopefully a family listening tonight can get on that and say, okay, here's some options for support groups or, here are some steps to really take. I
And
guess
another time, if I could, another time maybe we can talk about how
I'd love to
one
have you back.
makes the decision about sending their child to treatment and how difficult that decision is, and how
Right,
that also is like a source of conflict, or like it can be a source of conflict in a family, right? Because it's
right,
such a radical decision.
right.
And, like we're still talking about it years and years later. How could we? How
But
could we?
right. But I can also say, Nicole, like things have changed in that now we have options where you don't have to always go to residential treatment. I mean, now what's happening, and I'm seeing it more and more by really sophisticated, amazing teams, is this kind of when you do have an adolescent or a young adult or even adult who isn't able to, or wants to be in those walls, right? Or to be sent off, is you can get this kind of wraparound clinical support locally, which really kind of, they just kind of do what you would be doing within the residential setting, but not in the residential setting. And so for some
Here in
kids, that's
Florida,
great.
that's here in Florida. Because I got to tell you, if I knew that was here in Florida, we'd be taking advantage of it right now.
So nationally, there are teams that do this. And what we find with these teams is they will, and this is the stinky part is some of it can be costly, but what I've seen happen is they will have members of their team fly in and actually be with you guys, or they'll do a lot of remote stuff. This is recent though. This is only in the past, I'm thinking like 4 or 5 years that I've really seen this kick off. And I believe just like sobriety and recovery, there isn't just one fix. And so if there's any way we can offer the help and get the help, based on the need instead of just assuming,
Right.
everybody's going to want to do the same thing. And because, again, the point of doing this podcast is to let people know out there what resources are readily available right now that people don't know about. If you had a parent on the phone right now and they were looking for help, going through what you guys all went through. If there's any parting words, if there was one or two things that you just would want to get through to that family, what would it be?
I do talk to families a lot. Don't catastrophize, and nothing is forever.
Right,
Like, that probably is the biggest one, don't catastrophize, and it was someone said it to me, like, the day before my daughter went into treatment, and they were like, "Don't catastrophize, she'll go into treatment, she'll get the help she needs, and hopefully she'll come out and she'll be okay." Like, And it was so hard for me to think beyond
Right. You
the
think it's gonna be
idea.
forever like this.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd say that. I mean, I guess it's really the same thing you would say to somebody who's having an episode of any kind of
Right.
behavioral health crisis or medical, right? Like, there's
Right.
tomorrow. We can't feel
Right.
it right now, but there's a tomorrow.
Right. And I have to say I have watched your daughter from afar for all these years, and I've checked in with you, and she's very remarkable.
Yeah,
She
she's
is,
got a
from
long
what I
road
know,
ahead of her.
she
Right.
does, but
Yeah.
she is a remarkable young woman, and who is diligently doing the work and still is. It just shows how, I think, thank God you were an advocate. Thank God that you knew what to do when to do it in some ways, and you knew to ask for the help from the right people.
I'd say yes for the help and the right people. I was
Right.
very uncertain, but I had a lot of really good people helping to navigate me.
Right.
Hannah at one point, I would have told her right out, and then we didn't know what to do. And then she was
Right.
eventually kicked out, and that was, whew, but then we found another angel locally
Right.
who helped to
Right.
navigate us. I mean, that's really what it is. It's just finding these angels who, you know,
Wanna help and
and
wanna do the
have
right
the
thing.
experience. And you're right about that too. It's not everyone who wants to help. It's the people who have experience. That's super important.
Right. Well, I can't thank you enough for being here today, and I love that
I
you're in
love
my
you. You
life,
know that.
and I love that I hate that you guys went through any of this, but I am grateful that you called me that day, and I am in your life today, and that, I get to see you as a family grow, and it's pretty amazing to watch. And, I just, again, thank you for being here, and we'd love to have you back, and, I love you and thank you.
Sure. Love
Take
you
care.
back. Bye.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Connect Call. As we conclude, remember that insights shared are intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We strongly recommend consulting a qualified medical health professional or healthcare provider for personalized advice tailored to your unique needs. Your mental health journey is important, and having the right support is essential. If you're experiencing a mental health crisis or require immediate assistance, please reach out to a mental health provider or emergency services in your area. We're grateful to have you as part of our community, and your well-being remains our priority. So follow us on social media to stay connected, and be sure to catch one of our episodes on our YouTube channel. We're here to support you every step of the way.